Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to episode 14 of Tending Lilith's Fire with your hosts. I am Kohenet Matan here with Kohenet Deborah Grahn. And today we want to talk about change and hardship and fire and ease.
No contradictions there.
None at all. And it was, Deborah, you have been thinking about this because of some work that you're preparing. Do you want to share a bit about what brought you here to this
Sure.
question?
Well, I've been interacting with the fire a lot more than usual the last 6 or 8 months because of Lilith's Fire and the creation of Lilith's Fire Circle. And actually, my book 20 years ago, which came out of my thesis, or more than 20, is called Lilith's Fire, Reclaiming Our Sacred Life Force. But it sort of has been an underpinning and a thread running throughout my life, I guess, even when I'm not aware of it. But I'm very aware. It's at top of my awareness these days, especially as we're in a time of year when we're talking about things like purification and other words that I don't necessarily like. But the one that I do like and have seen evidence of many times and so appreciate is transformation. And I think that fire is a transforming force, whether it's emotional, not certainly necessarily physical, although we know that many cultures have fire ceremonies as part of ritual that are also transformative. Like a sweat lodge and like so many other things, a mikveh, and so the fire is just very much up, and so that's why I have that as my background. And we started talking about it as walking through the fire, which we are all doing now to one degree or another, also spiritually, psychologically, as our lives and our world change faster than we can track. And so, how do we find moments that are positive? And voluntary times of inspiration and transformation. And Annie, you pointed out that this idea that we have to be forced to make change, that we only transform out of negative experiences or tragedies or life crises, as you're seeing that as a social conditioning. Do you want to say more about that?
Yeah, I would say I think the idea that change has to be hard comes from conditioning. And one of the examples that I find really meaningful is around birthing. And I've seen a lot of folks talking about like we're in a birthing stage, and of course it's painful and laborious, and in order to deliver ourselves anew, there's screaming, and I heard a lot of that when I was pregnant, and I had chosen to have a home birth, and I learned hypnobirthing and prepared for my home birth with and then was able to have a home birth hypnobirth at home, which meant despite all the people who told me I was going to be begging for drugs and it was going to be hard, it wasn't for me. It's not that there was no pain, but I felt very present, and that I was able to manage and navigate the experience with such presence and really with breath, which is what hypnobirthing really is breathing. And the idea that more oxygen equals more oxytocin equals greater ease in the birthing process. And I noticed after I had that experience, where I birthed my daughter quickly and easily, people do not want to hear about that. Especially most people who have birthed have had traumatic birthing experiences, and it's very uncomfortable. This is part of our conditioning. We don't want to hear about something that goes easy for someone else when it goes hard for us. So I heard a lot of like, I hate you, it's not fair. And I internalized that and felt self-conscious about sharing my easy transformational transition experience. And I work with a lot of women who have young children, and we talk about that keeps going, when your kids are sleeping at night, people don't want to hear it. If their kids are not sleeping at night, like there's an expectation that the norm is the difficult. And one of the interesting things about that is that we suppress the stories of ease, which perpetuates the conditioning of the difficulty.
Right.
And I've been thinking a lot about what if transformation and transition could be hypnobirthed? Like, what if we could apply those principles so that we don't need to expect transformation and transition to be painful.
Right.
And instead we could invite ease, and that might look different for different people. I know for me, when I have to do a hard thing, now I think about what would make it easier. And then I often do a lot of preparation,
Right.
which I hear from some people around me, like, makes them uncomfortable. Why are you doing all of that for this thing? You can just do it and suck it up like me, you know?
Well, I think
Um,
that's so important, Annie. And I also want to say some words that back to you that you used that could be so potent if they were more in the culture. And those were words like powerful,
mhm.
relatively easy, even pleasurable.
Yes.
If we had that attitude about birthing, it certainly wouldn't always make it easy for every person, but
Mhm.
it really would shift the perspective. And I think you're right. The expectations going in. I had that as I was approaching my 50th year. I was dreading it for 2 years,
Mm.
literally. And by the time I got there, it was nothing. It was a breeze. It was easy. And maybe it was because of 2 years of psychological preparation, but there was also a lot of dread. So that it's different from birthing, but it does
Yeah,
come
but
from.
what if there had been folks in your life at that time, and maybe there were, and you weren't able to hear it, that's also possible,
Possible.
who were saying 50 is wonderful. How can we, let's bring you to 50, like, let's receive you across this threshold with joy and celebration.
Yeah.
And what if all transition and transformations were like that? And I feel like as priestesses,
Right.
this is a key part of the Kohenet training,
Mm.
is that our role in many ways as priestesses is to support people going through transitions and transformations. And so if we come to that with the attitude of, even though this might be a hard thing in your life, how can we bring support and ease and witnessing to make it feel less hard? Um,
Very important to have those supportive communities. And uh, you touched on something that was true. I did have that kind of support offered, and there were things like a croning ceremony, and I did not want to hear about them. And that is because of what's in the culture. Because
yes,
in this culture, you when you start aging, you become invisible. And so
yes.
I had to reach a point in my own life where, yes, that sounds like a wonderful idea. I'd be at that point now to acknowledge someone's, becoming a wise elder, and I'm very comfortable with that word now. And maybe it's the silver hair, I don't know, but my perspective and my attitude has definitely shifted. But I could feel the difference when I did my doctoral research in South Africa and came back here. I mean, I could feel the difference in how one is viewed. And I
Mhm.
think it depends a lot on, again, on the culture, on the country. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm in Canada and in Toronto, and it's fairly conservative here. And I have been hired for jobs because of my perspective, and because an organization is looking for a different perspective for a different kind of experience. And then once I start the job, they're like, well, you're new, so you need to be quiet and listen to what the people who've been here for a long time already
Mhm.
know, even though they sought me out and hired me because though the views of those people who'd been there for a long time were not serving the organization. But
Right.
as soon as I was in, the conditioning set in.
Wow.
And I felt like it was ageist and sexist.
Mhm.
And so, in contrast to your experience, I'm 42 and I can't wait to be 50, because I feel like I need to be old enough to be taken seriously.
Right.
And I celebrate my gray hair. And yeah, I feel like that transition, maybe because I see, I mean, it's a different time too, right? Like, a number
Yeah.
of years have passed since you turned
Yeah.
50. And I think thankfully the societal, it's still there, but it's shifting.
I think so.
um
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. There's more respect for the wisdom that one gains with years, and
Yes, yes, and more
celebration.
emphasis
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
on wisdom gained with years over any other way that we can gain wisdom, experience and innate and intuitive, etc.
What you just said about your work, that work experience, triggered something else, which is not entirely related, but I just want to mention it, and that is how ideas get killed and how
Mm.
we really have to be aware of that. And one of those is, I've heard not only in business but elsewhere, well, we've never done it that way. So
Hmm.
a desire to not hear any new ideas because it didn't work in the last, 30,000 years, or, in that person's experience at that company. We've always done it this way, or we've never done it that way, so a fear of trying new things. And this is a time that calls for new solutions. I've seen many people start to really express and expand their creative side because they're locked at home. And so, all together, I think as a group, as a society, we are trying different ways of being. And many of those are very positive to come out of all this unknown and chaos.
Yeah, and I think that's right on point. That we've never done it that way, or it's always been like this. If we go back to the theme of people believing we need to suffer for transformation, suffer for art, suffer for change, I was saying before we were recording that I think that belief comes from the old paradigm, which was one in which we were living in survival mode,
Right.
where suffering was the daily way of life, and it was how you knew you were still alive. In a lot of ways, it was like, if it hurts, keep going.
Right.
If it hurts, you're still here. And if it's not hurting, there was really a sense, if it's easy, something's wrong. And like the axe is probably about to fall on your neck.
Right. It's sort of in the same line of thinking of always be productive, always work, because if you take time to relax or celebrate too much, or, take time off, then something bad will happen. Or,
Yes.
the Protestant or Puritan ethic. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and also the that reminds me of the superstitions of like, don't celebrate beauty, don't acknowledge wisdom, don't acknowledge the good. It's like the peh, right? The
Right.
spitting of the, like, against the evil eye, the ayin hara. We don't want the evil eye to see any good, lest it come in and take it away.
Exactly.
So ease falls into that category as well. If it looks too easy, they're going to make it harder. So make sure it's hard enough that nobody
Right.
adds more weight.
Right. And that admonition and rituals against the evil eye is worldwide, as you
Yes.
know. And I
Yes.
just want to mention that because a couple of my friends who've done years of work in India experienced this directly when they complimented someone on how beautiful her baby was. And they woke up to find a ritual, a plate that was clearly part of a ritual outside their front door to ward off evil because they had praised the baby. And that's the same idea of can you explain the pepe for people who
Yeah,
don't know?
so I think they're like, my understanding, and this is not a full understanding, it's a superstition of like spitting in the
Right.
direction of the evil eye, to like distract
Right.
them from the beauty that has just been acknowledged.
Right. Right. Or even covering the baby's face
Oh, yeah.
sometimes, or giving them a different name. Right? Isn't there a whole
Yeah, adding a
that?
name, and also, hey, this is tending Lilith's fire, putting up amulets, amulets of protection, which have also been at times amulets to ward off Lilith, who came to
Right.
represent that evil eye.
Right. Right.
Although, in our work,
There's
oh,
one.
oh,
Yeah. There's one,
cool.
and I don't know the writing, unfortunately, because it's more like Aramaic, and it's just very hard to read. But that's one of the amulets that Annie's talking about. Yeah, too many of them are against Lilith and welcoming Adam and Eve because so many of them have been designed for birthing or pregnant mothers, or for the crib of a newborn, to
Right.
keep
And
away
I
from.
learned from reading the book that we just read, in the
Original
Lilith Circle.
original resistance.
Yes, original resistance, that Lilith maybe used to be invoked to protect women and babies, when they're like in childbirth and babies, and then in her demonization, the amulets that were to invoke her became to ward her off. So I like to say, like, let's return to invoking the powerful
Indeed. And,
goddess.
and I must share with you sometime, I haven't shown it to you yet, a piece of art. And this is where art can be so powerful. And of course, writing, poetry, and song, and ritual and performance. It's a small clay amulet that a student who graduated from the women's spirituality program before I did had made, and she gave to me. And it had three little pieces hanging from it, as many do. I don't have an example here, but as many amulets have little charms hanging from them. And these were the three angels who were sent to bring Lilith back to the garden, Senoi, Sansenoi, and Mangalov. And it was invoking Lilith instead of to keep her away, and invoking them, those angels, as her handmaidens. So it's one of my most prized objects. I'm happy she gave it to me.
You know, what just occurred to me is that shift from invoking Lilith to invoking Adam and Eve, depending on which sort of interpretation of the story of Eve one is taking in. Eve's childbirth, like as of Eve, childbirth, or as of Eve tasting from the fruit of the tree of knowledge, childbirth gets hard, according to some of those interpretations. And so when you invoke Eve, you're tuning into that energy stream of childbirth being difficult. And I wonder if there's, you know, some ritual to be done there about both reclaiming Eve and an interpretation of that text that is different than that, and also going back to Lilith, who was created with relative ease. And you know, well, Eve was created with relative ease too, actually, Adam, Eve, and just in different ways. But there's, for sure, there's what to look at there about what we're invoking in childbirth when we align ourselves with the story of childbirth being a punishment.
Right. The pain of childbirth being
correct. Yes,
right,
the pain of childbirth, the experience of childbirth, not the birthing, not the not the having of children, but the experience of it being hard. And how I do believe that the metaphor of birth as a metaphor for transformation gets used a lot. And I heard a friend shared with me a post by a man who is a spiritual guide, who was like, yes, we're birthing and labor is hard, and so like get ready for the pain. And I never do this, I did not know the guy, but I commented and I said, it's always great to hear childbirth analogies from a cis man. Because I just think it's not his, honestly, I feel like it's not his place to tell us that it has to be hard. And so, you know, you've heard it here. Childbirth doesn't have to be hard. If that's your experience, totally valid. And you know, I support whatever your lived real experience is. And also, I believe transformation doesn't have to be painful and hard. And I'm really devoted in my work to supporting people to notice what they believe are the pain points. And I think I've said this here before, it feels similar to this idea that we have to push ourselves out of our comfort zone in order to achieve our goals when our goals are outside or beyond our comfort zone. And I believe that's also connected to that old paradigm thinking of just do it, no pain, no gain. Learning happens outside of your comfort zone, growth happens outside of your comfort zone, those ideas. And I believe there's plenty to be learned from finally feeling safe. And when we identify somewhere we want to get to that doesn't feel comfortable, let's figure out how to grow our comfort zone around the goal. And that's what transformation can be. It can be an opportunity to notice, especially now in this shifting paradigm, when we're learning that we're not meant to do it all alone. Collaboration is key. Communities are necessary. What supports do I need? What information and guidance do I need to get to that place that feels beyond me right now, rather than let me suck it up and go through the fire.
Right. And I think you raise an interesting point of, you know, also appreciating what is in your comfort zone and growing and developing those things as much as possible. I just want to mention, so I don't forget, that I have on the Lilith Institute website a very long bibliography, because I started to want to, you know, put in the comments later a number of works, including on Eve, but a lot on Lilith, of course, and so I would direct viewers to that.
Great.
And we'll post some of these questions, you know, and things like, I have a couple like, what has caused you to transform? What have been some turning points in your life, whether you resisted them or welcomed them, and so on.
Yeah, and when I would love for people to notice if there have been times in your life where maybe you were surprised that change happened with more ease than you expected. And there are transformative moments in our lives, whether maybe the passing of a loved one, or a wedding, or a birth, or a job change, or a house change, or a relationship change, that you thought, well, this is supposed to be, and even, you know, psychologically, we're told like, these are the most stressful, most difficult moments in a
Right,
person's life.
exactly. There's a chart. Insurance companies
Yes.
have a chart.
Yes. So what if we looked at that as these are some of the most powerful and potent moments of a person's life,
Lovely.
rather than that these are the hardest moments of a person's life? It can, both can be true,
Right.
but what if they
Right.
don't have to be? What if they're, what if they can be mutually exclusive?
Yeah. Yeah. What if a terrifying and stressful moment can be also very powerful? And public speaking is one of those. You know, it's supposed to, it used to be anyhow, the number one fear people had, and they would always talk about that as a major stressor. But it's how you grow. Also,
And I feel like in the world of social media, that's no longer the case,
yeah, right.
where it's certainly not the top for most
Well,
people
this was in
anymore.
front of a group. This was about lifetime, you
Yes.
know, real actual people, and being addressing, you know, 12 or 200 people
Yes,
in
yes.
person, which I still think is probably, you know, more scary for many
For
people
some, yeah. For you?
posting on online. Yeah.
And I want to bring Jane Clapp's teaching again, that the physiology of anxiety, I haven't brought it in a while, so when I say again, it might be more than a year, but the physiology of anxiety is the same as the physiology of power. So that heart pounding, clammy hands,
Adrenaline.
flushed skin,
Oh, interesting.
your body produces the same response, and your brain doesn't know if you're hunting the tiger or being chased by the tiger. So it's really interesting to notice sometimes when we are feeling that anxiety, we may actually be experiencing a powerful moment and interpreting it as a fearful one.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this is the last thing I want to say. I know we have to go, but menstruation, you know, and menstrual cycles, very much the same thing. Instead of talking about it only as painful, only as the cramps and the headache or whatever, or can't sleep, those moments can be very potent, especially like not being able to sleep, being up, you know, having your cycle with the moon and being conscious of that, which we do as humans, and looking at it rather as a powerful time of dreaming, of introspection, of needing to be on your own and alone in solitude that is productive, not lonely, because you have created a sacred space for yourself for that purpose. I think that's one example.
I think that's a great example, and I want to add that I've read that in cultures that embrace that transition in community, and with support and celebration, the transition into menses, and also embrace menstruation and the care of our bodies in alignment with our hormones and our nutritional needs, that there are lots of cultures in which menstruation is not the painful, awful, difficult experience that we have here in North America. And I see the similarities between that and birth. Yes, also very much. So
and there's a sacred time and a menstrual hut, and there have been birthing huts, right? One book I really have to recommend on this is Blood, Bread, and Roses by Judy Grahn. We will put that in the notes, which is a look at and the philosophy that culture grew out of women's rituals, especially menstrual rites. And so I highly recommend reading that, even if at first you are in total disagreement with it, as I was, or very skeptical. After living with it a couple of years, it became a really sacred text, and it's very powerful for a long-term perspective on women's blood.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll throw out one more, which is Dr. Christiane Northrup writes about the wisdom of menopause and embracing that life stage as well, which is another one that in our society is really dreaded. And that goes back to what you were saying, Deborah, about aging and becoming invisible. And Christiane Northrup really flips that and talks about it as a time when women become more powerful and more clear and more aligned.
And I will just say one word to that, since I'm happily through that and also did dread it, and then found many blessings and gifts in it, and find that my relationship with the moon is even stronger. And my cycling, I still am doing a cycling, and very potent times are both new moon, and that comes out of the Judaism connection, I'm sure, but both new moon and full moon are very potent times and productive times for various activities. And yes, I'll leave it there. That's another conversation about the gifts of aging.
Yes. Okay. Well, for another day. I love that. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. If you are watching this for the first time, please subscribe so that you'll find out when there's more. And if you're enjoying it, please share with those who you think could benefit or would be interested.
Yeah, please do. And wonderful to be with you, Annie. And we welcome your questions and your comments as always.
Indeed. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thanks.